Hello, dear ones. Hello. Hi, dear ones. Welcome. Welcome to Self-Love Sermons. How are we doing tonight? My name is Ellen Gilbert. I'm a self-love coach, a divine feminine self-love coach as of a few weeks ago. Always here on Tuesdays at 8 Eastern to share in some self-love with all of you. We need community. One of the main tenets of the divine feminine self-love is the shameless pursuit of community. Why is it so hard in our culture to admit we need each other? We belong to each other. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I absolutely subscribe to that. It's been on my heart a lot lately. And one of the things that I guide my clients into is called cyclical living. We're going to be talking about that tonight. And the theme of tonight's sermon is surrendering to the dreaming time. That's the winter season. So this void phase, new moon phase, or the summer phase, the alternate of the summer phase, which is the winter phase. So directly on the opposite of summer. We are far from our star here in the northern hemisphere. We're far from the sun. So what does that look like for our energy? How does being far from the sun affect our energy? And how can we embrace and have compassion for our ebbing energy in this season? So that is what we will talk about tonight. This is actually adapted from a private retreat I did over the weekend. If you're interested in retreat yourself, these are my private community retreats. So you can book one for you and 4 friends, 4 to 9 friends. These are little 2-hour mini retreats, the one that I did. So if you like the topic tonight, if you like some of the meditations that we're going to do together, some of the embodiment practices, and the things that we're learning about, then reach out to me because I've already designed this as a retreat and I would love to lead you and your group through it. All right, once you get here, let me know that you're with us. Maybe I'll decide if I want to have my hair up or down because I'm feeling really restless with my hair right now. What else is new? I'm going to light our candle. If you have a candle, I invite you to join me. As long as this candle is burning, may we be loving ourselves. May we be learning in community, holding space for our bodies, our minds, our spirits, our hearts together. And so it is. Hello, Claire. Welcome. Gonna put this candle where you can see it. Nice. Excellent. Welcome, dear one. Good to have you with us. So the dreaming times. Here we go. We are only 6 days from the winter solstice. And that is the point when the sun is at its furthest point from the northern hemisphere. Just the very beginning of winter, which is when we celebrate the return of the sun. So just at the moment when all hope seems lost, just at the absolute breaking point of this darkness, of this desire, which means to be apart from our star, this winter desire, this longing, this cold season where everything is dead and we're wondering, will it be reborn again? Can we trust that there is spring on the other side? Just at that peak moment, the sun makes its way back back toward us. So that's what the ancient Druids would celebrate at Stonehenge. That's what the ancient Egyptians would celebrate during their festival of Saturnalia. And that's what has evolved into this Yuletide season, or the season of the Christian Christmas, the return of the sun, the rebirth of the sun, SON. So it's very interesting, isn't it? They're all related. And it's one of my favorite times of year, especially the solstice, because I always try to stay away from technology on the day or on the night. Usually can't take the whole day off if I'm working, but try to just light some candles or light a fire, have a little ritual, really invest in self care on that night. So that will be Monday. And if you've never created your own solstice ritual, go to luminousleanings.com, go to my website, and search for winter solstice, because I wrote a post a year ago on designing your own winter solstice ritual. So burning things is always good. Of course, bringing in evergreen boughs from outside and working with a lot of light and dark metaphors. And in fact, next week for our sermon, we'll do a winter solstice ritual together. So the day after the solstice. And speaking of winter, that's sort of the theme of our sermon tonight, because the ancient Celts called the winter the dreaming time. It was this dark time to rest and to dream, to actually play with storytelling and folklore, and to be in community together around the fire. You know, the work of the year was over. The stores had been saved up in the autumn, the handicrafts woven, and now it was really time for some leisure, but also for this large community weaving practice of storytelling, and really of creating philosophies, creating meaning together as a community. And they say in our human evolution, that's how we started evolving to have large social gatherings, was once we started cooking food and using fire to kind of sit around the fire. We didn't have to chew our food for as long because it was cooked. And so I just have this wonderful image of my ancestors evolving, you know, to have this fire and this cooked food and this warm hearth space to share together. And that's how communities started growing. And that's how humans really started evolving more and more. And then my ancestors, again, the Celts, calling this the dreaming time. I think there's something there that we can really grasp onto and help to make meaning in our own lives. And I want to honor here my teacher, Becca Piastrelli, who taught me about the dreaming time and has really guided me on this lifelong journey of ancestral ways. Um, so yeah, the dreaming time. What does this mean, and what is surrendering? Because the title is surrendering to the dreaming time. So on the wheel of the year, you know, on the wheel of this, the moon, so the cycles of the moon, and on our inner wheel, for those of us who have a menstrual cycle, you know, there are really four phases, and I've talked about these quite a bit. But I think it's worth mentioning here again, because if you're interested in cyclical living and in honoring your own ebbing and flowing, it's important to know. And this, I have to credit my menstrual coach, Claire Baker, with giving me these words, the four S words. So starting with spring, that inner spring of our hormones climbing, the outer spring of the sun returning after the cold winter. And in terms of the moon cycles, this is the waning moon. So the time really from now until we get back to our full moon in 2 weeks, the moon is growing again. These are all outer expressions of something that also happens internally. So it's really metaphorical, symbolic, but it reminds us as humans that we ebb and flow, we wax and wane, and it all belongs. And so the word for spring is start. It's a time for starting new projects. It's a time for kind of coming out of that winter cave, and you have a little more energy, you're feeling a little sexier. So, this would be the follicular phase of the menstrual cycle, or simply a time when you feel your energy is growing during the month, during the day, during the week, during the year. All of these time chunks have their own cycles and seasons, and it's different for every individual, and that's really important to remember. So that's spring. Summer, the S word is serve. So this would be the full moon season, the season of the solar summer when the sun is closest to our earth, and also the ovulatory phase of the menstrual cycle, or when you are at your peak energy. So serve, this is the 1/4 of our time that we are meant to be producing, that we are meant to be, using our energy for our community, for others. But guess what? That's not 100% of the time. We are not in this endless summer. This is one phase and one season, and that's how it's meant to be, right? And I think it's really healing for people to hear that. You do not have to be in an endless summer 24/7, okay? Then we have our third phase, which is the autumn. So the S word for autumn is, well, it's two S words, slow and soothe. So this would be the waning moon, the waning energy when our hormones begin to crash during the premenstrual phase, the luteal phase. And then, of course, this is also the time when the sun is beginning to recede again towards winter. So it's a very difficult time for a lot of people who menstruate. It can be like 10 days for some of us, and we can really be hard on ourselves because it feels like the inner critic is so much louder and stronger, and it feels like our fuse is so short. We're more likely to snap at each other, and then we can really internalize that as I am a bad person. And it wasn't until I started tracking my cycle that I could really have compassion for myself in my inner autumn. But what we're talking about tonight is the winter season. So, of course, this is the new moon time, which we're having now. Yesterday was a new moon eclipse in Sagittarius. So, very special time. You might be feeling a lot of your own inner critic stuff coming up right now. Astrologically speaking, that's sort of in the collective right now. And for our inner menstrual cycle, this would be the bleeding time. This is the time when the sun's furthest. So it's a time of going into our cave, being the hermit, being okay with being the hermit, really embracing it as a time of self care, rejuvenation. And it's necessary, just as the summer is necessary and the waning and waxing spring and autumn are, so is the winter. And the reason I call this surrendering to the dream time, well, surrender is the S word for winter. And it's so hard, right? It's so hard to surrender. We're going to talk about some of the reasons because of our overculture of shame that it's hard to surrender, and some ideas for how we can ease into this. And I really think of this surrendering, this letting go of the stories we tell ourselves that our worth is our productivity and our worth as women is how the male gaze perceives it, so internalized patriarchy then. Um, it makes it really, really, really difficult for us this time of year. And then we have this insane holiday season, which puts even more pressure on us. Unless we've done this inner work of unsubscribing, removing things from our plate, really making it a practice to check in with ourselves and say, well, do I want to buy Christmas presents for the mailman and everyone I've ever met? Like, if we're not checking in with ourselves and what we actually want because we've been taught to devalue ourselves, to not trust ourselves, and we've been taught that our productivity is our worth, that we are supposed to be in this inner summer all the time, then it can be a really challenging time of year because collectively, which the sun is the collective, so collectively we are waning in energy. I mean, we're more than waning. We have waned. We are flatlining in energy. And that's how it's supposed to be. You know, I'm still working on really embracing the supposed to be part of this because I feel like I wait all month for my ovulatory phase, my inner summer, and then I just heap the pressure on like, you've got to just get it all done. And then I kind of see the fall and winter subconsciously as like, oh, like I hate this time. I don't want to give into it, but I guess it's necessary to get back to the very yang energetics of the spring and the summer. So that is a lifelong journey, and don't judge yourself on the journey. Like wherever you are, it's where you're meant to be. Again, cyclical. That's why we talk about cycles so much in these sermons, because I'm a divine feminine self-love coach. Divine feminine is the cycles. The moon rules the divine feminine energies, the yin energy. And some people say that the darkness of winter, the time when we're apart from our star, our sun, is the darkness of the womb, right? It's that womb energy of out of nothing, out of void space comes life, comes rebirth. And no wonder our ancient ancestors worshipped this amazing cycle that's always happening around us, that guides and rules our days, our years, our months. It's really amazing. I think we've lost touch with that as a part of our severed connection with nature. And it all makes sense to me that our severed connection with ourselves and our bodies and the feminine, the devaluing of the feminine in a patriarchal culture, goes along, right along with the devaluing of nature. Um, so I hope this is making sense. Claire, if you have questions, let me know. And I realized that I just kind of jumped right in without us practicing anything, but we're going to be talking more about what the winter has to offer us. Actually, that's what I'll do. Let's talk about what the winter has to offer, and then we're going to do a little shadow work, breath practice together called Tong Lin. And then we'll talk about desire, this concept of being apart from our star, what we long for, and what all of this has to do with winter. Claire says this does make sense. Good, I'm so glad to hear it. Fantastic. Okay. So I've pretty much already touched on, yeah, surrendering is hard because we derive our worth from productivity because of capitalism. Oh, I wanted to say, taking things off your plate, like that is radical. And I've been working with this concept of like, at the end of every day, there's probably 5 to 10 to 20 things that I wanted to get done, depending on how hopeful and optimistic I was feeling at the beginning of the day. Uh, and yet, I can feel a lot of guilt when those things didn't get done. And so I'm starting to see this taking things off my plate as a radical act of healing internalized capitalism and shifting culture. So I want us all to get really proud when we don't get things done, when we take things off our plate. And as I was saying before, in regards to the holidays, when we check in with ourselves and say, is this really something I want to do? Or am I just behaving on autopilot because I've learned that this is what I should do, that this is what women should do. That's a really big story this time of year because we hold so much of the emotional labor around the shopping and the decorating and the food preparation and the family coordination and the cards. And I mean, I don't even have children, you know? So it's like, I can only imagine, honestly. Um, but there are so many ways we compare ourselves against each other. There are so many, there's an endless list of ways we could do that. Okay, but let's just take a deep breath and let that shit go. Like, seriously, if it doesn't light you up from the tips of your toes to the crown of your head, if it's not a full body yes, okay, like, you don't have time for it. Your energy is precious. It is so precious. And this time of year, especially, it is even more precious. So we need to actually value our time and our energy more in the winter, as well as our inner winter, and as well as, I think, the lunar winter, the new moon phase. Some of us might be getting hit with all three right now. So, what's the answer? Taking things off your plate and as an act of self love, non judgment. I mean, use the pandemic as an excuse to do less. Hopefully, we're not traveling for the holidays. Hopefully, we're being safe and protecting each other's health and our own health. And you can really like lean into that this year. See how it feels to do less, to have that excuse, and try to copy paste that in the future. Because if we want to create this new normal together, then let's really center our own pleasure, our own desire in what we give our time and energy to. Please, can we just do this? Because I think about my mother and all the ways I feel like there were just expectations heaped upon her this time of year. And I know that I contributed to that, of course, but culture mostly. So let's take that back because we don't need any more things to do. We don't need more things on our list or things to buy. Can we all just be really aware of how capitalism is invading our sacred brain space, our sacred temples? Yeah, and have those really firm boundaries this time of year. Okay? Because think about where else you could be putting your precious energy, you know? Like right now, where else could you be putting your precious energy if it wasn't towards doing things that you didn't want to actually do? Like, you could actually go for a walk and be in nature. You could actually try that meditation practice that you've been longing to incorporate. Like, you could actually take a fucking bath and read a novel. Like, you could actually connect with a loved one or write a letter to someone. Like, you could actually do the things that bring you that sweet self love, that feeling of just full body presence and pleasure. How much better would that be? All right. So, those are some ideas. I'd love to hear anyone else's. Okay. So, winter has its own value and worth. Like, it does help us for the summer. It helps us to dreaming time. It helps us to plan ahead. You know, there can be some nice planning energy right around the new year, if that has meaning for you. If it doesn't, I think that's awesome as well. Um, but it can be a good time to plan for the year ahead and to really lean in to what we desire and to prepare and like rest for that energy output that's coming. And winter has its own worth. So it's not, self-care isn't only worthy because it saves us in an emergency crisis, or, rest isn't only worthy because it recharges our batteries. That's a very capitalist way of thinking, right? Rest and self-care and winter are also valuable because we are not working machines. The fullness of who we are is this cyclical being. So it shows us this whole other side of ourselves. Like when you have a good work life balance, you probably are discovering parts of yourself that you had forgotten, or that you had lost, or you didn't even know were there, you know? And I'm not just talking about hobbies, but like connections that needed fostering, slowing down and listening to your body, to the way your mind works, and looking at that. And this is called shadow work. So, shadow work deals with the subconscious, just like dreams. So, the dreaming time is a great time to do some shadow work. And shadow work has many forms. Um, it can be working with your dreams and literally keeping a journal by your bed so that when you wake up, you're writing it down before you forget, and then doing your own intuitive interpretation. Um, we talked about intuition last week. So before you go to grandmother Google and start, searching for that animal that was in your dream or that symbol that was in your dream, I would encourage you to ask yourself, how did you feel in the dream? That's the most valuable piece of information about your dream, is your own emotion, what you were attached to in the dream, because there's usually some attachment um, that can be quite revealing. And then, yeah, I'm all for turning to Google and being like, there was a moose in my dream. Like, does that mean anything? Like, the number 7 kept coming up. What's that about? Like, there have been symbols in my dreams that meant nothing to me, and when I Googled it, it was like, oh, this is very clear. So that's how I work with dreams, which is absolutely shadow work. And there's also ancestral healing work, creating altars for the ancestors, writing letters, having pictures of them around. I am working on a big family cookbook project right now, and I've got so many fantastic pictures of my great grandparents and even great great grandparents that I don't think I'd ever seen, or if I had, I wasn't really valuing these pictures. So now I'm like, because I'm getting into this ancestral work, I'm like, I'm going to print these and hang them around and really try to get, familiar with who these people are, as well as the people that we don't have pictures of, the people that are unseen and unknown, the many faceless thousands and thousands of people who contributed to my evolution. And then there's witnessing our thoughts, which is probably my favorite form of shadow work. It's really hard, it's not easy. Um, but it was really when I stopped identifying with my thoughts, and when someone being Tara Brock, my spiritual teacher, taught me, like, you are not your thoughts, that I was like, oh, and I attribute that as my spiritual awakening. And I was able to see so clearly, like, all of the ego strategies, and see them with non-judgment, see them with friendliness, eventually even loving kindness and compassion. And that's really what put me on this path of working with clients to examine their thought patterns, to see the ways that they were suffering because they were identified with the ego. They thought that they were the strategies. You know, you are not your strategies. There's so much more to you. There's like this eternal, boundless, loving spaciousness that we can tap into. And so I consider that shadow work. It's not easy. Healing old wounds, whatever maybe addictions are there, patterns, beliefs, stories, the ways we've been socialized by culture and by our unique families. Um, there's so many pieces to this, right? But luckily, we can alchemize our own suffering, our own darkness, our own shadow, our own discomfort, anxiety, into compassion, into light. We can bring these things above the surface. So right now they might be below this line, below this surface of our awareness. So they're in the subconscious realm. But by bringing them up, we can see them or bringing them into the light. And winter is a great time to do this work. And what we talked about last week with intuition is a huge part of it. Because if you're only aware of the logical thinking mind, which again is that yang masculine energy, and you're suppressing, devaluing, writing off what's unconscious or subconscious, what's in your body, what's like deep, deep down somewhere in the darkness of your mind, um, well, you're not living a whole life, first of all. Um, you're denying yourself knowing your full self, which is quite a tragedy. And you're probably being steered by this rudder of the subconscious of what's below the ocean and your iceberg. It's controlling you because you're not even aware of it. So, one of my favorite shadow work practices is called Tong Lin. And this is a Buddhist practice, a breathwork practice that I really started leaning into with the pandemic. So, a little context here. Many of us feel like we cannot look at the world suffering because we would be overwhelmed by it, or we cannot hold space for others' suffering because we're just going to get totally inundated with these feelings, these difficult emotions. Maybe there will be just tears, and if we start crying, we'll never stop. Um, maybe we just get so identified that we're like, it's just going to be too painful. And we don't even want to open ourselves up to that because we're like, I've got enough shit. Like, I've got my own suffering, or I'm just barely holding it together. Or maybe we're in that inner winter of, there's not much to give. And I am all for boundaries. Like, that's one of my favorite values is boundaries. Um, and I think it's important to know how much space and energy and time and resources you have to give others at all times and negotiate that with them. And you are worthy of that. Across the board, you're worthy of saying no. And I feel like we underestimate our own power so often. And we underestimate the value of holding that space for suffering and seeing the linkages, you know? And one of the things in this self-care journey, this self-care field that I'm in, is I feel like we can become so focused on the self that we forget the point, which is that we are connected to this greater web of life. We are connected to the universe, we're connected to all beings everywhere. And that's where the sort of divine feminine spirituality really comes in for me. So it's both and. And anywho, so what I'm trying to say is I believe you can hold the space for the suffering of yourself, others, even those who are difficult, um, and even the whole world, and even the whole universe, right? It all comes back to that higher self that we tap into in meditation, that boundless being of love and light. Like, that's your higher potential. And when you help another, like a genuine altruism, a genuine help, not to get your value from it, when you genuinely are supportive, maybe you're in that inner summer, right? That serving energy, you're reminded of your higher self and you're reminded of this capacity. And that's what Tong Lin is about. And it's a bit counterintuitive. So on the in breath, we're actually focusing on that suffering. So we're breathing in the suffering, the pain, the shame, the sorrow of all beings everywhere. And we're breathing out, we're sending them back love and compassion. And this all happens in the mind, okay? This is metaphorical. And it also has a very real effect. So don't get too caught up in kind of trying to analyze it, because multiple things can be true at the same time. And I say it's counterintuitive because so often we're breathing in the fullness of spaciousness and abundance and positive things, and then we're exhaling, kind of letting go what no longer serves. And this is kind of the opposite. So it can be kind of weird for my mind sometimes, but it's a good challenge. And if you want, you can start with your own suffering. So breathing in any pain in the body, any confusion or frustration that happened today, any difficult emotions or sensations that you're dealing with right now in this moment, any fears, grief, striving, anger. You can breathe that in first and then breathe out, sending these things your love and compassion. And I like starting this way because it sets the tone and it gives you that resourcing of like, now I'm ready to take it out in these concentric widening circles. So you start here, you move on to the beloved ones, those who are really dear to you, your partner, your children, your family, your best friends, breathing in their sorrows, their grief, really seeing their faces, allowing yourself, your body, your lungs, your rib cage, your heart to expand as you take on and take in that pain and discomfort. And then we alchemize, we breathe out the love and the light. And then taking it a step further, you can go to a neutral person. And then finally, or not so finally, to a difficult person, difficult people, those who are not so easy to love. It's important to include them. And then finally, all beings everywhere. Some teachers have you go through, your city, your state, your country, your continent, your hemisphere, and then the whole world, and maybe even the whole universe. I'm not going to be too prescriptive here, so do whatever feels good to you, but you get the picture of the widening circles. Claire says, that boundless being of love and light, I had not heard this definition of higher self. It gives me a clear image. Oh, thank you, Claire. Yeah, that's my favorite way of putting the higher self. Yeah, absolutely. And we don't get there every day. We don't get there every meditation sitting, Sometimes she surprises us when we are reminded of her. Yeah, but I think she's always there. All right. So let's practice some Tong Lin together. What do you say? Finding a comfortable position, doing whatever you need to do to arrive there, bringing the feet flat on the floor if possible, or rooting your tailbone down. I bring a hand to the heart to connect me into my own boundlessness, my own resourcing, the goodness within me. When I put a hand on my heart, I'm saying, I trust you, goodness. I see you. I invite you forward to be here now. Closing the eyes. Breathing in and out deeply at your own pace, just to land in your body. Feeling the weight of the legs, the shoulders loosening, the feet or tailbone grounding into the earth. Can you feel that lovely supporting energy of the earth below with its own animism, its own energy, separate from yours and supporting and feeding yours? Maybe give the toes a little wiggle to acknowledge it below. A little thank you. And we begin Tong Lin by bringing suffering to mind, whether it's yours or you want to start broader. What discomfort is here? And do you have the courage to breathe it in and hold space for it in your body? With the big inhale, holding it at the top, and on the exhale, intentionally sending it your love and compassion. If you like, you can open mouth exhale like steam leaving the body. Continue practicing in this way, breathing in the suffering, holding space in your body, holding it at the top. Open mouth exhale, sending it light and love. Imagining that light going to meet the darkness, giving it essential life and light. Breathing deeply in, breathing deeply out. Continue in this way. Widening the circle. To include more and more people. Closing the mouth if you wish, and allowing the exhale through the nose. Breathing in the suffering, breathing out the compassion. Imagine that compassion leaving your lungs, going to wrap around the shoulders of the one that you are sending it towards. Imagine the look on their face as they receive this embrace, this compassion. Feeling the power of your own body, your own breath, to alchemize this suffering into compassion. Surprised by your own capacity to hold this space. You're doing it. On our last breath in, we will include all beings everywhere, bringing the hands together at heart center. Take a deep breath in, the suffering of all beings everywhere. You got this. And on the exhale, sending your compassion to all beings everywhere. May you, me, and all beings everywhere be awakened, be at ease, be free from suffering and fear. And so it is. Bowing to you, honoring your practice. Thank you, dear ones. I love Tong Lin. You don't have to rush out of it. Whenever you're ready, you can come back. It's such a sweet practice because it connects us back to our intention, which is just that. I mean, at the end of the day, right? May all beings everywhere be free from suffering, be at ease, be at peace. Just reminding myself that this is my intention really puts me at peace and at ease. There's something to it. Especially if you find yourself judging yourself. Practicing Tong Lin, practicing loving kindness or metta can really help. Yeah. Thank you for practicing with me. All right. So the last piece of our talk tonight is around this concept of desire and longing. And I've been reflecting a lot on this, as you can probably tell. I think we're going to do a January challenge around the concept of pleasure, because I'm all about prioritizing pleasure, destigmatizing desire. What does that look like practically? I'm thinking some prompts, some ways to practice like sensual embodied pleasure as a gateway to presence. I'm thinking of these things for January because I think it's in the dead of winter. The dead of winter. It was so fucking cold today. Like, I had to walk Luna, of course. And I was like shivering with my coat and my gloves and all my things on. So it is like in the dead of winter. Can we light that fire? That inner fire of embodied pleasure. Like, do we dare engage in such life affirming practices, whether it's sex, mindful masturbation, whether it's giving yourself a warm oil massage, eating like decadent chocolate, you know, listening to an audiobook of like a trashy novel, like whatever the hell is giving you life. Can we lean into it and not judge it in the dead of winter, especially? And so I've been thinking about this, especially in a pandemic, also. Not only is it the dead of winter, it's also the height of a global pandemic that has gone on and on. So what better time to seize life and these life-giving practices? Um, and I was thinking about desire being apart from our star. As I've said, that's where the word desire comes from. And this concept of winter and the return of the sun, the beginning of the journey of the sun back towards us. And what are we calling in? Like, what does this sun represent? Well, it represents what we're longing for, because you belong to what you long for. You don't have to push it away or say it's bad or feel guilty. Chances are it doesn't hurt anyone. And yet we've been socialized to believe this, you know? So not only are we surrendering this winter, surrendering to the necessary rest that is waiting for us here, but we're also claiming our desires. And that's fucking radical. That's really fucking radical. So, in the spirit of making this practical, I invite you to now grab a piece of paper, if you wish, and you're gonna write what you're desiring or draw a picture. Like, what are you desiring for your life? Or for today, or for tonight? What do you desire? You can write it down, draw a picture. And think of actions. Maybe it's for 2021. How do you see yourself? Do you see yourself in community? Do you see yourself achieving something? But what do you really desire? Like, not what you think success means or should look like. What society tells you your timeline should be. Like, what does your body tell you you're really longing for? I'm sure for many of us, this includes finally being with our family and friends again, finally being able to gather or travel. These are huge. You might say, never have our desires and longings been so strong. Might as well lean into them, even though it's scary and hard. Okay, so now that you've got that, what ways of being, what feminine or yin energetic things can you start right now in this void winter space to prepare you for that? When you get to reap that desire harvest, you know, what will have been the contributing ways of being? These could be beliefs, these could be mantras, these could be words, just singular words like core desired feelings, which we've talked about here before. Um, these could be thought patterns, you know. Or it could be pictures again. How are you going to be this winter? And how is that being going to give way to what you desire? And it can be actions. That's okay too. Maybe what you desire is accessible to you right now. I hope it is. Maybe it's just one word. One big thing I'm working on is healing my whole womb space. So I've had low back pain and inflexible or less flexible than I would like hamstrings for basically since like puberty. And I've always tried to correct it through stretching my hamstrings and strengthening my low back, which are both great things. But now I'm working on from the womb out, like doing like pelvic massage, pelvic floor strengthening, working with my psoas muscle, just so tight to release that, and then seeing how the natural ripple effect of that is the low back and the hamstring. So interesting. I never thought to center all of the womb as what needed to be healed in order to get those boxes checked. Um, that's kind of a tangent, but I wanted to share that. Yeah. So, listening to my womb, being more embodied this winter, I know will give way to some of the desires that I'm calling in for 2021, for the next season, for next summer, for the next phase of my life. And this isn't to be another to do list. You know, this is really to be an inspiration. So I invite you to take what you've written and translate it somehow, some way that you'll see it and you'll be reminded, like, oh yeah, to actually prioritize my pleasure, to actually call in my sun, what I'm desiring this winter and this winter solstice. Um, this is the way I want to be. The things I just wrote down are the behaviors and the thoughts and the mantras that I want to be reminded of. And if there comes a day that they're no longer true for you, you get to throw them out. How freeing is that? In everything we do, let's check back in and make sure it's what we still want to do, or that it's still contributing. All right. Well, dear ones, thank you for joining me for another sermon. Wherever you are in space and time, I wish you a warm winter. I wish you this womb energy of magic, of creation, spontaneous regeneration and rebirth. And I'm so looking forward to our winter solstice ritual next week. And I might have some offerings before the year is through, but if not, definitely keep an eye out for this January pleasure challenge that I am still dreaming up for all of you. And have an excellent night. Do something luxurious. Do something that feels like what you're longing for. You are worthy. These are my pictures, by the way. It's like me doing yoga and meditating and playing guitar and having fire and being in community. All right. So much love to you. Bye, dear ones. How do I end this video? I've done it so... Oh, there it is. Okay.